I get to introduce. I am very, very, very happy to welcome Professor Bettina Gramlich-Oka, all the way from Japan, who just arrived yesterday. She is at Sophia University, and she is a historian of, I would think, I don't know, intellectual historian, perhaps economic historian, you think? But she has been at Sophia University since, let's see, 1993. No, she has been teaching since 2009. Okay, I'm sorry. She's been there in and out in various capacities. She has taught at Columbia University as well and various other places, but mostly recently she's been at Sophia. And she's also, many of you know her as the editor of Monumenta Nipponica, a very, very important role that she's playing in the entire Japanese studies program, I would say. So I mentioned that she's an intellectual historian, but I think that, in my view, she made her big debut as an author of an article about Tadano Makuzu in Monumenta Nipponica. What year was that you published that? Some years ago, 2001. Right, with Janet Goodwin and Yuki Terazawa and Walther and Elizabeth Leister. That appeared in Monumenta Nipponica, and then it was followed by another section of it later. And then later, she published a book on Tadano Makuzu. So this is really important article in many ways, but it's like breaking down the Berlin Wall, I think. She broke the thick wall of male-dominant Confucian discourse in the Tokugawa period by publishing this. This is women's thoughts, and there wasn't anything like that before she published this. So it's really a very, very important article. And then since then, she has published some books on economic history of Japan with some Japanese scholars as well. And I know less about that, I'm sorry to say. So today's talk is called A Women's Network in and around 1800. So you will enjoy all the pink dots that you saw on the flyer. Yes. So here is Professor Bettina Gramlich-Oka. Please welcome her. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess the mic is turned on. No, I do have.
Oh, you have that.
I got one here. Really? I got it there. Okay. All set. So. And I try not to move. Okay. Well, thank you very much for this wonderful introduction of me. And I also would like to thank the Center of Japanese Studies here at the University of Michigan. I mean, this is a wonderful place. It's the first time for me also to be in Ann Arbor, so I'm very, very intrigued to be here. And I'm overly, really enjoying everything I've seen so far, which isn't much. And I hope to see really much more of the university. But just walking across campus today, right before spring break, seeing so many students on campus, wonderful. So, I mean, obviously here is a very strong academic atmosphere going on, and I'm very pleased to see that. It's a little bit different in Japan lately at the university. Some of you who may have been exchange students know about that. The atmosphere is a little bit different. So seeing here lots of students being at their laptops, working hard, preparing maybe for midterms or so forth. Am I overdoing it? Okay, you got the message. Oh, this is taped? I should think about what I say. Well, anyway, thank you very much also to Barbara to arrange my stay here. And also thank you all for coming to this talk in this interesting type of classroom with lots of monitors. And I'm actually nervous because I don't know any of you, or not many of you, just a couple of you. So I haven't been in a situation like that in a while. So I also will probably read my paper in so that I stay focused on it. And I have to admit, I finished a paper this morning. Sorry about that. But yes, I'm not so much an economic historian than economic thought. I guess that's much more what I do. I mean, I started off with intellectual history and trying to put women into intellectual history, which wasn't so easy to do. And I think I didn't really succeed, I have to say, because the general narrative still, when you talk about intellectual history in the Tokugawa period, simply leaves out women. Tadano Makuzu, the book that I published, is hardly ever cited in that regard. People who do gender studies or are interested in women history, they might pick up the book. People who are also in literature might also pick up the book, but people who are in intellectual history usually try to ignore it. So I was not succeeding, yes. Yes, I mean, the wall, the Berlin Wall came down. But that wall will be difficult to break. So afterwards I ventured out more into economic thought, because Makuzu already had some implications of that, and her father in particular worked on it. And later on I became more interested in network studies and tried to figure out maybe I can break down something else within intellectual histories if I come from a different approach that no one assumes that it will break down something, which is network studies. Unfortunately, I have been a little bit busy with a different job. As Tomi mentioned, I'm now editing Monumenta Nipponica, which really keeps me so busy that hardly I can pursue my research very much. But in my free time, spare time that I have, like from last Friday when we just sent the new issue out to the printer, so hopefully in a few weeks it will be up on Muse and you can enjoy it, and I should make maybe later a little bit publicity about that. So in my free time I try to work on social networks in the Edo period amongst scholars. And here we also have, of course, women, so I try also to bring in women as well. So without much further ado, I really should get started giving the time. So Michigan time is something like, okay, we'll see what the Michigan time is. So it's 10 minutes, not 15. In Germany, it's always like 15 minutes before, after the hour. You have different times here in Michigan. Anyway, so the talk is a women's network in around 1800. And let me start. Yes, we have a nice logo for our database, but more about that later. I will not show you that many bubbles, I have to admit. It will be really much more text-based. So I'll start with that, and at the end, if time allows, and if there's also interest, I also introduce you to the database and what I try to do with digital humanities. Anyway, as the father is conducting his daughter to the steps, he says, "Be careful and reverent. Day in, day out, disobey no command of your new parents." When the mother is giving the girl her bridal sash and tying on the handkerchief, she says, "Be diligent and reverent. Day in and out, disobey no rule of the household." The line quoted from the Confucian book of Etiquette and Rites as part of a set of marital instructions by one of our main protagonists, Rai Kyohei, may give the impression that the young woman ought to sever links to the natal home and to expect a circumscribed domestic life. Certainly, it is nothing new that these prescriptions cannot be taken at face value without diminishing the complexity of family life in the Edo period. Married women often were the nexus for various networks. They participated in networks that grew out of their natal homes and multiplied during married life instead of being reduced to within the gates of their marital home. So you may think now, okay, so this is really nothing new. You knew all that. Everyone who has read something about women in the Edo period knows already about that. In today's presentation, I examine the complexity of family life from the experience of a woman whose life is well documented. So here's a little bit the difference. Now I really try to be more into the material and not just making broader statements of some random evidence that we have. We detect some oddities regarding her life course, demonstrating that the effort to look closely into past experiences is a worthwhile endeavor. Her participation in networks excuse me, in which she played different roles, challenges some of the common assumptions of a wife in a household, while others are yet to be reassured. Rai Shizu was the nexus of various networks. Foremost a wife and mother to a nuptial family, she never let go of being a daughter to her natal house. And in addition, she was a friend to those who shared her interest in cultural activities. These three networks in which Shizu participated carry different weight in her life, depending on her own and other circumstances. Networks are never static, but fluid and dynamic and bend to the dictates of time and space. So let me give you first a brief exposition of Shizu's life. Our examination begins with Shizu's marriage. Shizu grew up in Osaka as the elder daughter of the scholar-physician Inooka Gisai. At age 20, her marriage was arranged to Rai Shizu, the older son of a dyer from Takahara in Hiroshima domain, who had come to Osaka more than a decade ago to establish himself as a scholar. When Shizu, at the time 34, reported back home about his prospective bride, he noted in the letter that Gisai mentioned that there was nothing special about his daughter, except that she was good at needlework and did not play the koto. The letter seems not to have been true, as he found out later on. Consent between the two families was quickly reached, and within weeks all the arrangements had been made for the engagement. 500 hiki worth in gold for sashes and silk for kimono were provided by the groom's family. After their wedding, the 20-year-old Shizu moved into Shunsui's rented house, which also served as his private school. Over the years, the couple had 4 children, but only their firstborn son, the today still well-known scholar and poet Rai Sanyo, and his sister Mio survived childhood. In their early years of marriage, Shunsui's career required Shizu to move long distance repeatedly. When Shunsui won an appointment as Confucian scholar to the Hiroshima domain, starting in 1782, the couple with their firstborn son Sanyo moved to its castle town, uprooting Shizu from her familiar environment. Her still unaccustomed life was interrupted only after 1 year, however, when in 1783 Shunsui was first posted to Edo as tutor to the domain lord's son and heir. During his absence, Shizu, with Sanyo, moved back to Osaka to her parents. When after almost 2 years Shunsui's duty in Edo was over, in 1785, Shizu settled once more in Hiroshima. Setting up home wasn't meant to be for Shunsui, though, since within a few months Shunsui was ordered to leave again for Edo, a pattern that would repeat itself until 1803, when his last term of duty in Edo ended. Shizu maintained the household in Shunsui's absence and in her 3 decades of widowhood. One main issue that Shizu had to deal with was securing a successor for her husband, which was complicated by the fact that their son Sanyo, soon after his marriage, ran off. After having raised her own children, tending to heirs in waiting and their offspring became a perennial task in Shizu's life. Due to unfortunate circumstances, 2 adoptions of a prospective heir took place, and as a widow, since she outlived everyone in her generation and even many of the generation of her children, she kept arranging marriages for the heir and cared for great-grandchildren to ensure that in the future someone will continue the family and its profession as domain scholars. So first we would look into her marital network. Shizu's main participation in a network throughout her adult life was without surprise that of her marital family. But many features of her role are particular to her household and cannot be considered typical. To illustrate this, I take up her associations linked to residence, household management, child-rearing, daughters-in-law, maintaining ties with in-laws of children, and her epistolary network. First, her residence. Marriage for Shizu meant to become the link between 2 families from different social circumstances and places, but not in the conventional way. Shizu, from a scholar-physician's home of urban Osaka, with parents and 1 younger sister, married the oldest son of a family of dyers of rural Takehara, a household without women. Having lost his mother Naka in his teens and without his father remarrying, Shunsui had only two younger brothers, Shumpu and Kyohei, whom we encountered in the beginning. The family constellation explains that Shizu never had a mother-in-law, but doesn't answer why Shizu also never lived with her marital family. Instead, the newly wedded couple started their life together in a separate residence, far away from Shunsui's hometown. Certainly, Shunsui, as the oldest son, was considered with his new wife to become eventually the main household of the next generation, but it was of a different kind. Shunsui, with the support of his family, meant to break with the business of dyer, leaving that to an uncle, and to become a professional scholar. The distant nuclear family was therefore a subsequent result of this choice. While their residence is thus explained, it is still surprising that upon marriage, Shizu did not at least go and visit her spouse's family in Takehara. Instead, Shunsui's father, Matachuro, and youngest brother, Kyohei, came to Osaka to travel with the new couple for sort of a honeymoon to Kyoto to celebrate their union. Shizu's meet the family had to wait until 2 years later, after the first child was born and the young family went to Shunsui's hometown for a visit so that family and relatives could be introduced to Shizu at last. That paternal grandfather, Matachuro, aged 74, was so happy about his first grandchild that he gave him the name Hisataro, long-awaited boy. That was Sanyo's first name. Perhaps enforced the need for Shizu to go to let him hold the baby boy without making him travel again to Osaka. Once established, however, when it came to her own generation, her household resembled in structure one that we are more accustomed to. Their residence was the center of the main house of the Rai family and was meant to be so for generations to come. Excuse me. So household management. For more than a decade, as a young wife, Shizu was in charge of the family business, the family name, its finances, and its fortunes without her husband due to Shunsui's duty in Edo. Shizu's management of the house included, next to preparation of clothing for the entire family and general household chores such as making miso and pickling plums and radishes, the practice of Chushi's family rituals. In an adaptation of the Chinese model, Shunsui manufactured a genealogy that extended to 5 generations. The retroactive creation of a house, an ear, and giving the family a past was adapted to the conditions of the late Edo period in which they lived, and fortunately, Shizu was already familiar with Confucian ritual practice from her natal home. Over the next 20 years, these rituals culminated in more than 40 a year conducted in their home. Not to be forgotten are the special meals that had to be prepared for these rituals. As you can see here, all the different foodstuff that had to be arranged. Well, they didn't have pork, and so it was usually fowl or fish that they would be using. But Shizu had to oversee their preparation and presentation. Excuse me for a second. In the early years of her marriage, Shunsui's new profession, kagyo, of a scholar, led to a change of status from commoner to warrior. With Shinsu's promotion to domain scholar in the employ of the Hiroshima domain, the couple was without the recourse of an established local network, and Shizu had hence to learn a new role and move and act in different circles. From Osaka and of commoner stock, Shizu expressed the weight of the upward social move in her daily records. The rules of the warrior household were new to her, and her diary, which she began writing during this time period, bears witness to the anxiety and unease she felt in dealing with the unaccustomed environment and the many people she encountered. Her diary actually lasted for 55 years. Shizu's father Gisai pointed that out clearly in letters of encouragement, and in one particular phrase, which from now on all the women in the Rai network had to learn by joining the family. And the same advice was also given to young men in the household. And it says, quote, "As the wife of a samurai, it does not do to have the disposition, the konjo, of a townsman or farmer." End of quote. Keep that in mind. But not only status as such, but also the new household of scholars established by Shunsui and Shizu became an enterprise that didn't come easy to the next generation, regardless of gender. Child rearing. Running together a model household and ancestor worship, however, anticipated descendants. And here Shizu, in her child rearing role, faced serious obstacles. Shunsui's heir had to be trained as a Confucian scholar, requiring thus a specific skill set, which made the task extremely difficult, since even under more simple circumstances, raising a child to maturity was an uncertain endeavor. Shizu lost 2 sons, and the health of the surviving children were monitored with much anxiety, as we read in her diary. In particular, Sanyo's childhood appears to have been difficult. Traces of his many illnesses and notable wild temper, kansho, can be found in the diaries and letters. For instance, when Shizu was back in Osaka during Shunsui's first tour of duty to Edo, her letters to her marital family express the worries of a young mother in charge of raising the child. Sanyo was not an easy child, played wildly, and disliked being calmed down with moxa. Studying too was not his favorite activity, altogether not the best precondition for the future successor of Shunsui. As a teenager, Sanyo's condition did not improve despite his longer stays in Takahara with family or visits to hot springs. At least in terms of learning, Sanyo showed more discipline, and in 1797, Shunsui decided that Sanyo, aged 18, should go on to Edo and study at the shogunate school that recently opened its gates to domain retainers and unemployed samurai. Right after his return, the young man married at the age of only 20. But apparently Sanyo was not fond of sedentary wedded life in Hiroshima, and in the 9th month of 1800, he ran off when the opportunity arose on a trip to Takahara to represent Shunsui at a funeral service, leaving behind a pregnant wife. Shizu had to face these traumatic events without Shunsui. Shizu's diary reflects the state of emergency that arose when she found out that Sanyo had absconded. And it is also one of the rare occasions where her diary of the early years includes a poem, jotted down one day after she wrote to Shunsui in Edo about what had happened. So here's the poem. After Sanyo's return, the pregnant wife returned to her parents, and Sanyo was put under house arrest. Right after the baby boy, Itsuan, was born, he was taken in by Shizu, and the official divorce followed a few days later. As soon as Sanyo absconded in 1800, Shunsui, aged 55 and on duty in Edo, had to find a replacement for his successor. Shunsui explained to the domain that it was difficult to find a suitable son so quickly, but his younger brother Shumpu in Takahara had a 15 or 16-year-old boy, who in fact was actually by Japanese count only 11. Today's count he would be 10. And he would first take him in to see if he had potential. Once he has proven himself, adoption would follow. Shunsui reached out to his brother Shumpu, who had at the time only 2 other daughters. He had to give his only son to Shunsui in order, as Shunsui argued to the authorities, to continue the new family business as domain scholar of the main line of the family. Shizu was in charge of raising the new extension in the family, while the adoption took place in steps. The situation must have been difficult for Shizu, who had lost 2 boys in the past 4 years, trained her 12-year-old daughter in writing and weaving, had a baby grandson in her care, and had in addition an incarcerated Sanyo in her home. The selected boy moved in and became a provisional adoptee a year later. The adopted son was formally introduced to the Lord and thereby fully adopted in 1804, receiving soon after the name Gonjiro. Here's the first adoption. Adoption was a necessary official step for the continuation of the family, although in reality it didn't mean cutting off close ties between parent and child. In the case of the Rai family, the new heir often returned to Takahata and stayed for some time in his natal home. Conditions then improved a little, and we read in the diaries of both Shizu and Shunsui how Sanyo, after he was released from house arrest in 1805, would go on outings with his former cousin, now younger brother, and designated head of the family in waiting. Sanyo himself stayed at home until 1809, making his parents quite unhappy when staying out all night too often. Yes, he always went out drinking and wouldn't come back, and there is a curfew. After all, he was a samurai's son. So it was decided that he should go to help out at the school of Shunsui's close friend Kancha-san in Kannabe of Fukuyama domain, for which official permission was granted. Not for too long, though. In 1811, at age 32, Sanyo left the area for good and moved to Kyoto to become the famous scholar and poet he is known as today, leaving his son in the care of his mother and father. Shunsui and Shizu were still afraid that their new family might not outlast, and subsequent events show that their fears were accurate. Tragically, Gonjiro died in the first month of 1815 in Takahata, aged only 26, leaving behind a pregnant woman. The woman Kinu, no dates, was not an official wife. I have no idea where she comes from, whether she lived in Hiroshima or Takahata, I don't know. But anyway, she was pregnant, and the baby boy Tatsudo was therefore also raised by Shizu. She took him in because it's, the adopted son's son. And so she was now also the substitute mother, not only for Sanyo's son, but also for Gonjiro's son. Shunsui, by now already 70 years old, was truly in a fix, and he has, of course, not retired yet. There is no retirement age. In Japan now there is. I look forward to 65. Shunsui and Shizu's daughter, Mio, was married out to the domain retainer Shindo Kichinosuke at age 20 in 1808. Gonjiro's baby son was too young to be made heir. Shumpu himself was forced to adopt the son-in-law, and Kyohei had only one son. So Shunsui decided to declare his grandchild Itsuan, Sanyo's son from his unfortunate first marriage, as his heir and presented him to the Lord at age 15. The adoption was officially approved a few months later, and Itsuan, who was raised since birth in the Rai household, was certainly qualified to become Shunsui's successor in the domain school. So things seems to be okay. Shunsui died soon after, 1816, and his own succession was still only tenuously in the hands of a 16-year-old grandson. Shizu, now widowed at the age 57, was left behind in charge of him and a baby not even a year old from Gonjiro. Her son Sanyo lived independently as a scholar in Kyoto, and her daughter Mio was married but still without child. There is lots of room for speculation about the relationship of the two boys who were raised in the main house without their biological mothers, who were not dead, but either divorced, as in case of Itsuan, or simply not recognized, as in Tatsudo's case. But I leave this up to others. The private school, the Chuku, in Shizu's main house of the Rai family had been and continued to be an educational base for young male offspring of the extended Rai family, including also her natal family. Not only Itsuan and Tatsudo were trained in the private school at home, but also Shumpu's other grandson, Kiroku, in Takahata, received his education there. When Sanyo died and left behind 3 young children, his oldest son, Shiho, who is not on the chart here because the chart would get really too large, he was sent from Kyoto to Hiroshima to be trained in Shizu's home as well. Thus, in 1833, the 3 male family members whose fate were all intertwined ended up living together for the next 8 years or so under Shizu's roof. Itsuan was 33, Tatsudo was 19, and the little new son from Sanyo was 11. Itsuan, as the heir of Shunsui, though, had Shizu's main attention, and his overconsumption of sake was only one concern amongst many. Like his father, Itsuan too married early, and also more than once, and it was Shizu who helped with the arrangements as well as with caring for his offspring when the mother died prematurely. That brings me to another topic of her relations. being a mother-in-law. Shizu, a woman who has never had a mother-in-law or lived with her in-laws as the family head of the main branch, became herself a mother-in-law, and that many times. One thing that makes one suspicious of the extant records is the portrayal of these younger women. None of them enjoyed particular good health. Shizu, even though doctors visit her at least monthly for one or the other malady, lived until age 84, and she gives the impression of a strong mare in comparison to all the young fillies who came to live with her. The first, if only semi, daughter-in-law was the bride of Shunsui's brother Kyohei. When Kyohei married in 1787, the 15-year-old Yura, daughter of a fellow Hiroshima domain scholar, the couple stayed in her house for the next 8 years. Since the Rai parents were deceased, Shizu represented the female head of the main line already, and given the age difference of about 14 years, Shizu was probably something of an older sister / mother-in-law to Yura. According to Shizu's diary, Yura often went home to see her mother and took along also little Sanyo. Also for giving birth to her first child, Saishin, Yura went home. Once Kyohei established his new house, Yura isn't mentioned by name as much any longer in the diary. But it's difficult to say how close these two women were or not, because still Shizu would go and visit the residents. Either way, we find no negative comments about her in Shizu's diary, only that she was sick once in a while. So this is the daughter-in-law, sister-in-law relationship. The first real daughter-in-law was Sanyo's bride, Jun. No dates for her, the daughter of a domain doctor. Jun was about 15 years old when she married Sanyo and entered Shizu's household, again a 15-year-old by Japanese count, meaning 14. And Shunsui was in Edo at the time. Given all the rules and rituals put down by Shunsui, and probably also by Shizu, a young bride may have had second thoughts after entering the household. And indeed, Shizu's diary is filled with entries mentioning the young wife staying often in bed, indicating headaches that perhaps moxa and acupuncture could not alleviate. Once Shizu jots down in her diary that Jun's father, a doctor, who was called to look after her, told Shizu Jun had inherited her mother's personality. This little biting remark in Shizu's diary, which is unusual for her otherwise detached voice, may indicate their relationship. After the divorce was settled and the baby born was taken away from her, the parents, who shared now a grandchild, continued their relationship, whereas Jun was married off to another household and did not enter the Rai house again. The next daughter-in-law who entered Shizu's home was Kuni. Again, no dates, and she was a younger sister of a domain retainer. Itsuan's first wife. Shizu was already a widow for 4 years when the wedding took place in 1820, but the marriage ended in divorce even before a year was over. During the short marriage, Kuni had stayed in bed most of the time. So biographers speculate about Itsuan having made pregnant one of the maids, and so that may have been the reason why she was unhappy when she entered, but I leave those speculation out because the letters and the diary does not indicate much. But then in 1822, Itsuan remarried, and this time again a 15-year-old girl called Sawa from another fellow domain retainer's sister, with whom he had subsequently 3 children. Sawa was not very healthy most of their marriage either, and died in 1834 at the young age of 27. Fortunately, Sawa's older sister-in-law, Terakawa Kinu, came on a regular basis to help Shizu with caring for the 3 children Sawa had left behind. But Shizu, herself 75, was forced to find another bride who could raise the 3 children, including Sanyo's son from his second marriage, whom she had taken in the previous year. So in 1836, Itsuan married the 18-year-old Nagao Chie, born probably around 1817, the daughter of another domain retainer. This marriage apparently lasted, but Shizu was not pleased by much of the behavior Chie displayed. Jealous, yakimochi, and being in a bad mood, fukigen, are the words in how Shizu describes Chie. The couple often quarreled, daikenka, and since a maid was part of the quarrel, we can maybe again speculate what the reasons may have been. Itsuan really liked women and he liked to drink. Chie too stayed in bed a lot, mainly when Itsuan was drunk and she just didn't want to bother with him and clean up after his mess because he usually would throw stuff around, according to Shizu's account. Not much of direct physical attack, that no domestic violence I can detect yet, but he would throw around the kotatsu and yeah, it was just lots of that. Or when she was completely puzzled by the young wife's reactions, Shizu called her strange woman, okashina fujin. After 7 years of marriage, Chie was with child, given birth to a daughter in 1843. She was named Shizu after her great-grandmother, who just died that year. So it is easy from the records to get the impression that Shizu did not truly approve of any of the young women, and only perhaps the second wife of Sanyo, who is Rie. She may have measured up to her standard. But when Shizu visited them in Kyoto, she did not stay in their house, but in an inn. And Shizu, she enjoyed her company during the day, and also Rie would often make her hair. But, they never lived under one roof. And also, Rie was never meant to be the main female head of the house of the next generation. So the relationship between her and Rie were from the very beginning different. And the letters express that. She only has very good things to say about Rie. So thus, all in all, the impression Shizu makes as a mother-in-law fits rather our stereotypes that we have of these women, right? Now, what is interesting about another relationship that Shizu has is the relationship to her brothers-in-law. Her connection to these Shunsui's brothers, is really particular. These cooperative, horizontal relations with her brothers-in-law are rather unheard of, or simply not often mentioned in other records. We don't really hear much about relationships, about siblings-in-laws. But they illustrate the integration of Shizu amongst the Rai brothers, who had no sister, as a family member who informed and was also informed regardless of her gender and her young age. I mean, she was the youngest. The three brothers got along very well, and that has been mentioned in almost any biography about them. They also included their offspring. They all got along well. In Shunsui's absence, Shumpu and Kyohei took turns in mentoring Sanyo, taking him to the hot spring or letting him stay for a while in their house. Together, they also went often on outings. For instance, we have one trip in 1807 when Shunsui took Sanyo and Kyohei took his son Saishin to Takahara, where Shumpu was waiting for them with his son, which was by then already Shunsui's heir, Gonjiro. The two generations of three brothers and their three male offspring spent time together with poetry sessions, making it appear as if all the struggles over successions were serious only on an official level, but not on a personal one. Yet Shumpu and Kyohei were also very close to Shizu. One of Shizu's lifelong supporter and delegate in Shunsui's absence was in particular her 5 years older brother-in-law, Kyohei, who had moved in with them when he too rose to samurai status. When Kyohei married, as I mentioned before, the new couple lived with Shizu for the next 8 years. Kyohei continued throughout his life to be like a brother to Shizu. When Sanyo absconded, Kyohei began the search for Sanyo right away. 2 months later, Kyohei brought him back. Kyohei was the one trusted in all matters, as expressed by Shunsui when leaving behind instructions for Shizu when he went off to Edo. I won't elaborate, he says, but you can consult with Kyohei. Also, consult him with any domestic affairs. Later, when she was a widow and she left on a trip to Kyoto, she pointed out to those staying behind that she had Kyohei's consent and that he was, as usual, to be consulted in case of uncertainty. So Kyohei and Shizu always were somehow interrelated. As a widow, both brothers supported Shizu even more with frequent visits. In 1827, when Shunpu had passed away as well, Kyohei and Shizu went together on a 3-month trip to Kyoto, stopping on their way in Takahara to visit relatives, to Kannabe to see Kancha-san, and meeting in Osaka family. There and in Kyoto, Sanyo's friends and students joined them for outings, since many of their own friends had already passed away. Unfortunately, when in 1834 Kyohei died, he left Shizu behind as the only family member of their generation. So the connection to families related by marriage. After I concentrated on the immediate family within the house, what has also a central place in Shizu's life and her relations are Shizu's links to all the Takehara relatives who often came and stayed with them, and the families of recent marital bonds, such as the Misono couple with whom they shared a grandchild, the Shindo family of her daughter Mio, or the Kato family of Kyohei's wife, with all whom Shizu had regular contact. Even when the marriages didn't work out, Shizu continued to be in touch with the families by receiving or paying visits, sending and receiving gifts, and coming together for family rituals and seasonal celebrations. Shizu's social links appear to be mainly local, mostly family related, yet for more distant links, her industrious enthusiasm and energy to communicate via letters plays a distinct part in her participation in networks. It is the networking through letters. Shizu's literacy was not average. Her literacy was used to educate the many children that came to live with her, but right from the beginning, Shizu's literacy and skills to compose prose and poetry became also an important asset to her function as link between and amongst the families. On her return trip from the first trip to Takehara as a young mother, Shizu wrote thank you letters on behalf of her husband. After Shunzu and Shizu began to settle in Hiroshima, Shizu was diligent in writing letters not only home to Osaka, but also to her family in Takehara. Her correspondence reached a new level when she returned with Sanyo to Osaka. Shizu became the central node for family matters for 2 years. From Osaka, Shizu would report monthly to Shunzu in Edo, and almost as frequently to her brother-in-law Shumpu and uncle and aunt in Takehara, since her father-in-law had already passed away. Shizu also forwarded to Takehara letters from Shunsui. That's why we have all these letters, because they all ended up in Takehara. Their letters, meant to be shared amongst the extended family members, dealt with many issues. One of them reported on the conditions of Osaka during the Tenmei famine in the 1780s that affected in particular eastern Japan. Osaka was impacted due to speculation on the rice market, and the comparisons between Takehara, Osaka, and Edo of the availability and price of rice made family members aware that the famine was not because of the lack of food, but its poor distribution. Shumpu constantly sent food and rice bills to Shizu, but sometimes without success when the shipment didn't reach its destination. In general, though, the Ino-Oka family was not exposed to serious harm. But Shizu reported how some of Shunsui's dear friends succumbed to the epidemic caused by the famine. Despite the distance between Takehara, Osaka, and Edo, all the family members constantly sent along supplies and words of advice and encouragement. Shizu used her skills, of course, also for writing her diary, but she was the letter writer, the one note in the middle, to do so. Those are just some excerpts of a few letters when she was, I guess, around 80 or so that she sent to Osaka. So she would continue her diary for 55 years, and it really stopped only a little bit before she passed away. And Shunsui, of course, he did the same as well. His diary stopped like 2 weeks before he died. All right, now but going back to the natal home, right? The other major network that she had. The daily coming and going we encounter in her diaries attest to Shizu's busy household and social life in Hiroshima, yet this should not make us believe that her life was only revolving in the castle town around her husband's family. Shizu's second main network that I want to point out is her natal family. The Ino-Oka house's past is not well known, and it was most likely with her father Gisai that the profession of a physician scholar provided for its income. With only 2 daughters despite 2 marriages, her father Gisai must have been on the outlook for a suitable son-in-law to take over his name in school. But when his younger brother Soryo, you see on it, yeah, you can see him, with whom he shared his house, had conceivably secured succession with 3 young children, Gisai thus married out Shizu. But the ties to her natal home were never broken, but remained to the opposites throughout strong. For her first move to Hiroshima, Shizu and 3-year-old Sanyo were accompanied by her mother Ju and younger sister Nao and 10-year-old cousin Inooka Zonsai. Taking this occasion for the family members of the 2 families to meet, they stopped first in Takahara, where celebrations were held in their honor. It's very rare that female members of families would ever get together if they are not from the same hometown. And in this case, it was a moment where they would actually able to do so. After setting up Shizu in her new home in Hiroshima 1 month later, Shizu's mother and sister returned to Osaka, leaving the young cousin behind to train with Shunsui, since the youth had been chosen to be the future Inooka household head. Shizu not only had Sonsai from her natal family joining her household in Hiroshima. Some 30 years later, her great-nephew Inooka Kyosai, who is the son of Sonsai, from Osaka too stayed with her for an extended period of time. What is even more striking is the fact that when in 1783 Shunsui was sent to Edo for the first time, he decided and was able to obtain permission from the domain to send Shizu and Sanyo to return to her natal home in Osaka for the duration of his absence, instead of her staying in either Hiroshima, as all the other warrior wives would do, or sending her to Takahara, right, to his family. Whether her going to Takahara was ever considered as an option, the sources really don't tell. We are therefore in the realm of speculation that perhaps in the event of a firstborn son who ventures out to establish himself with a new profession, customary practices of and around receiving a bride simply did not have to be followed. And perhaps for a domain too, a scholar in the employ was not expected to be like other retainers, right? The regular samurai official. But this explains only partially why Shizu returned to Osaka. To Shizu, going back home was certainly a blessing. The young mother noticed quickly that the Rai family had different ideas of how to raise a child. While in Osaka, Shizu described in a letter to her brother-in-law Shumpu in Takahara how Sanyo wasn't well, didn't eat well, and was often ill-tempered. Shumpu, the doctor in the family, declared that this was because of the food they ate in the Inooka house. That was actually also a physician's home, right? Where they didn't set any limits on the amount. Sanyo was just allowed to eat as much as he wanted, right? Shunsui, the father, more of a stoic, readily agreed in his reply letter from Edo. Yeah, that must be it. It's just the overeating. The more lenient Inooka way of rearing also took its toll in other areas. Shizu was in charge of Sanyo's education, and here too the son was not easily convinced to do what he was told. The boy was about 5, that's Japanese 5, so he didn't have birth yet, he was about 3 years old, in our account, when he had to read aloud Shushi's primer Shogaku. Yet when he didn't feel like it, he would say it makes his stomach hurt. And Shizu would let that go, right? Being back home let Shizu indulge in being cosseted daughter, going around to the theater again and enjoying just all the amusements in Osaka. She enjoyed her time there. While the Inooka family itself ceased, even before the death of the last male family member, Kyosai, it was through the Inooka woman that bonds among scholar houses were maintained. So that's actually also here important. You can see that on the chart. You see the Rai family to the left, and Inooka, Bito, Ochi, and Nakai. Those are all families. They all are scholar houses. And it was through these women that these houses were maintained, although the Inooka house itself would cease to exist. At age 31, Shizu's younger sister now married one of Shunsui's best friends, Bito Chishu. Soryo's 2 daughters as well both married fellow scholars. Nui married the scholar Ochi Koshu, a student of Chishu, and her sister Tei married Nakai Sekika, right, from the Nakai family of the Kaitokudo. Chiku-san's son and successor of the Kaitokudo, he would become that. Even though the man initiated these relationships and Shunzui and his Osaka friends had succeeded with their professional aims, the Ino-Oka women in their lives had not only a significant share and actively participated in this endeavor, but were crucial to their success. One house came to an end, while 4 other scholar houses continued with the help of Ino-Oka women. Perhaps to honor the family in the Rai house, Confucian family rituals were performed annually, beginning with the death of Shizu's mother in 1784. When the ancestral tablets of the Ino-Oka house were taken to the Nakai family, the moment is recorded in Shizu's diary as a grim fact. We have one more network to look at, of course, because it's not all family. There's also friends and fun and other activities, right, that we also should mention. For instance, while my focus was here so far only on the family networks, both marital and natal, I ought to mention, even though only briefly, Shizu's many friends she met on her path. When Shizu celebrated her 80th birthday in Hiroshima, for instance, 130 people came, including 6 Noh actors and 2 musicians. Shizu met in Hiroshima women who shared with her the interest in poetry. Many wives and daughters of Shunzui's colleagues are mentioned. Mineko, mother and daughter, Hayashi women, etc. It's just full of women in the diary coming to write poetry with her, or she would go and visit them. They were either composing waka, or they would go out to see Noh performances, would visit temples, would go to the hot springs, and so forth, throughout her life. Often they would also send off their compilations of poetry, first to Osawa Roan, who has been an old acquaintance of Shizu, and later to Kagawa Kageki, another Kyoto poet. One early friend who features often in Shizu's diary is Kato Yura's mother, the mother-in-law of Kyohei. The bride's mother called often, and they would constantly be together, would always go out to see the theater, and so forth. Another one is Terakawa Kinu, also a woman about her age, whom she would always hang out with. Later on, she would also go on trips with some of these women, farther trips, and one of them is a poet friend that she would take along on a trip to Kyoto. We have actually lots of trips going on in Shizu's life. She would, early on, of course, her honeymoon with Shunzui and his father and brother. She wrote her first travel diary about that. Later on, she would go to Takehara and again write an account about this trip. So the first few decades of her life as a mother and also as a wife, she mainly with family members, she would be traveling more in the neighborhood of Hiroshima, not really reaching out so much. But 30 years later, as a widow and age 60, Sanyo came by to take her on a trip to Kyoto. And even though the house was certainly not in a stable and secured condition, she left home for 3 months. Without a daughter-in-law in the house to step in as the woman in charge, but perhaps relying on her daughter who lived somewhere else, Shizu went nonetheless on a journey, leaving behind a 19-year-old Itsuan, 16-year-old great-nephew Ino-Oka Kyosai from Osaka, and 5-year-old Tatsudo, son of the adopted heir Gonjiro. She wrote down 14 points of instructions for Itsuan, just as Shunzui used to do for her, but then she left. Shizu had at last the opportunity in person to reconnect with family and old acquaintances and to make new ones. Shizu's diary for the first time becomes not a daily record of events that occur around the professional life of a scholar, but a travel diary in prose and poetry. Sanyo, Shumpu's adopted son by marriage Shoen, and her friend Eisetsu were her travel companions. They stopped by in Takehara, they stopped by in Kannabe, they stopped by everywhere. And once in Osaka, all the family members came to their inn to have a dinner together. The next day she would go and visit each family. Then they would move on to Kyoto, where she would enjoy little excursions to Yoshino, and then also sometimes Nara. She would go out to flower viewing and lots to the theater. And she would go shopping, lots of shopping. She always went shopping. There are lists in the diary of what she bought and how much it cost. She's a little bit like her husband, Shunzui, who also had always these accounts of how much she spent. and she spent a lot. And my next thing will be really to look into the finances of this family, how she was able to do so. Anyway, she loved it, and even when she didn't feel well, she would find a doctor who was working in the imperial palace to prescribe her some medicine that would make her feel right away much better, that she could go out shopping on that very same day. When Kagawa Kageki, one of the well-known poets at the time in Kyoto, would come to visit her, after he left, she would go again shopping. So shopping was more important than the theater than many of the other things. Anyway, she enjoyed it, and she had friends to go with too. 5 years later, at age 63, she had a daughter-in-law now for the first time, but Itsuan's alcohol consumption was sort of an issue, but she left. She left for Kyoto again, and this time with her former maidservant Risa for 8 months. She just left. And then she would do so again 3 years later, this time with her brother-in-law Kyohei. She would just constantly leave, having a household at home that is not secured at all, and would enjoy. And she writes down from all the visits to the theater. She was really a theater buff. I mean, it was bunraku but also the kabuki. At age 70 was her last trip to Kyoto. Sanyo came by again to pick her up. And again, they would enjoy the time of just visiting all kinds of hot springs and temples and so forth. Afterwards, she had to stop going to Kyoto. She probably would have. I mean, she lived until 84, but there was no one anymore around. Sanyo died as well. There was no one to pick her up. There was no official reason for her to go. Her brother-in-law had died as well. She was the only one in that generation. So we only know from her grandson, Itsuan, who would take her out on smaller trips in the neighborhood, like Miyajima or Itsukushima. So what do we learn? And I'm coming to my conclusion here. Women's networks often grow out of their natal homes and multiply during married life. Letter writers, like the members of the extended Rai family, certainly meant networks to resist distance and endure long periods of time. But networks are difficult to force. People join and people leave due to often unprecedented circumstances such as death or dissension. Shizu participate in various networks, sometimes more actively in one, sometimes more in another. And it is the task ahead of me now to collect more data to understand more fully her relations. And this is, I guess I could also just stop here. And this is just one of the things that we do with my database. It's a Japanese biographical database that I have been developing for 5 or 6 years now, where we have Rai Shunsu's diary as our database in the beginning, and later on we will also include Rai Shizu's diary, putting in all the data of the people that visited, the connections among them, what background they have. Ideally, it would become some sort of a Wikipedia page. I will have a symposium in March where I invite various scholars in Japan who work on digital humanities to try to find out how crowdsourcing would work for my database. We just have a new interface right now in our one, and if you ever have the time, please come and visit. It's open access at this point. You can't, of course, enter data, but you can look at the visualizations, you can create them, you can ask questions on it, and ideally, yes, at one point it would become something large. And with this, I really should stop. I'm sorry. Yes, Michigan time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's like reading Shukan Bunshun or something.
I know.
Yes.
More
gossipy things.
Oh, there's more.
Okay, so we don't have much time for questions. We have to leave in 10 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much for your interesting introduction to this diary. You have a lot to unpack in the coming years, I can see. I had a couple of questions, but I'll just ask one. You mentioned shopping and that she had an affinity for shopping. And obviously she kept records of what she shopped for. And I wondered if, who she was, what did she buy and who was she buying for? Were gifts a way to lubricate her social network? And if you could say anything about that. The gift-giving aspect.
Yeah, thank you for that great question. Yes, it's easy to see. I mean, she even writes down for whom the presents are. So I mean, of course, it's for people back at home, or some stuff that she would drop off on her way back to when she first would stop in Osaka, and then Takahara and Hiroshima. So all the relatives and friends that she had. Most of them are fans. Paper, of course, paper was always important. Little things, yes. So we do have lists with names even who would receive that.
What about local confections and things like that?
Because of the family rituals, her son Sanyo would constantly send food. And there is a pair of scholars of nutrition. They got their degrees in nutrition. They made these lists, actually. They read her entire diary and getting out all the types of food stuff that were sent to her and used in the family rituals. So we have them already even analyzed. You know, it's wonderful. And they are all open access on Ochanomizu Choshidai. So, yes.
Thank you for the fascinating talk. And to follow up on that point, does she talk about the preparation of those foods or foods on a daily basis? Or is that something she just delegates to the staff?
I know who you are. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for that question. Yes, there are, I think, 400 menus that Shunsui wrote down. Wow. Shunsui is really this overman. I mean, he is just a huge presence, just like her. But in a so he wrote down 400 menus for the rituals of what should be served and in what order. Yeah, he has. I mean, I don't know if I will become 130, but that's what I would have to become in order to read all the records that they left, the two of them. Yes, so we do have them, and also they are analyzed already, these records. So I can give you later, actually, yes, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm wondering after her husband died, did she keep up contacts with any of his colleagues in any measure? Was there any responsibility that she felt for maintaining whatever network he had before he passed away?
Yes, thank you. Great question. And that is actually one of the things that I didn't read down now, my conclusion that I actually had is her relationship to men was actually on a very equal basis. So all these scholars that constantly came to her house, probably because of her education, literacy, and her interests, she was always considered as part of it. So yes, there was no break in that, the relationships before and after. Her sister too. I mean, all the Ino-Oka women, in fact, because they all married into those top scholars of the time who really tried to change the entire intellectual discourse, right? I mean, with the reforms under Matsudaira Sadanobu, they were in a special category, and the women, they were just part of that as well. So she would continue, and they would come into, they still had the private school. And Itsuan, I mean, he was an alcoholic, and he did lots of stuff, but he was also later on persecuted. I mean, he was made to quit, to retire, because he yelled at another official who screwed up the economic reforms of the domain, and he was right. So, and then he was reinstalled later. Anyway, there were lots of stories, and she was part of that as well. I mean, the house was not that large. It was large, but not that large. So she was always in acting, and she was a widow for many years, right? And throughout for 30 years, and she would be still in touch with all these other scholars as well.
Hello.
Hello.
I had a question about the analyses that you do on these networks once you have them. For example, what kind of analyses you do, or whether or not you look at like the groupings, the modules of these analyses, and whether they of the networks, and whether they reveal anything about the properties of those people there.
Right. So thank you. It's a great question. And as I said, in my day job, it doesn't leave me any job to. Oh, it's scrolling. Okay. At this point in our database, we have about 2,000 people logged in and 5,000 events, but they're all centered around Rai Shizu, the husband. So that is my main focus. I mean, for today I was talking about the women, but actually it was about the men more so. So yes, there's much. We have, you can go and visit, please, the site. You can do all kinds of things. You can look only at gender, male or female. We have other things that you can add if I would know how to. I'm still learning it myself. You can put in categories like you want to know what status they are from, and also a time. You can go and scroll the time in what year actually they were friends or not, or met. I mean, that's why we have 5,000 events logged, so that you see who was in 1800, the 5th month of the 13th day in Osaka and met in that one bar. So you're able with that database to do so. But we need more. My next step now is text mining to integrate more texts that are already, I mean, first we go with published sources because it's easier. The handwritten material that I have, that hopefully I will also still be able to do before I retire. Text mining for handwritten stuff for Japanese is still the most challenging one, but in 2 weeks in Japan, I will have a symposium where 2 specialists are coming, and maybe they found now the jewel of how to break the code and just make it happen. Yes, but from now on, I really try with crowdsourcing so that people can just add. We have, I don't know if you're familiar with the China database at Harvard. They are our model, and they scanned every text available, and of course Chinese is easier to use than Japanese for many reasons. And so we build really that upon. So it should be good, but you can visit the website, network-studies.org, and then if you have the Vis suite, then the visualization goes in.
I have a question about, you mentioned a diary, and then you mentioned travel diaries. I'm sort of, is there like a big main diary that I can address a question to?
Yes.
Okay.
So the Baishi Nikki, Baishi is her pen name. Baishi Nikki is her diary that she wrote for 55 years. And that is the main one. Okay. And the travel diary is included in there because all of a sudden when she started off going to Kyoto, she would use her diary as her travel diary as well. Okay. There are also a few travel diaries that she wrote when she was younger, and they are separated. Some of them are published, but most of the stuff is just not published.
But yeah. I think what you mentioned in her diary that she is very detached,
yes.
Very measured in her tones, so which made me wonder, is this diary addressed to, I mean, is she thinking about people who are going to come afterward who are going to read her diary, or was this an individual? I mean, I have a feeling that this was not just an individual expression of letting it all hang out, but she was thinking about future generations.
Right, you're correct.
Was there a didactic purpose for this, how to run the household or that sort of thing?
It's a wonderful question. It's more record keeping because her husband, I mean, they write it parallel. And he was away for 10. So they started off both at the same time when he became a samurai, and they moved to Hiroshima, and she started off. So you can see the weather is sort of almost the same on that day. Sometimes it's not. You feel like, what? It was cloudy, and he is in the same city, and it's sunny. But anyway, so little things that are just amusing. But he was away for more than 10 years in Edo. So she would keep the record. It's a record-keeping thing. The diary is not a personal, emotional thing to let it all go. No, it's a detached record of who came to the house, whom did she meet, what is going on, who is sick. And Shunsui's diary is the same, but from his perspective. So there are, it's sometimes also the names for us, because we want to know about all the names involved. It's easier than with both, because she might not name the family name, or he has a different name, and so it's much easier to see. So probably when he came back from Edo, I can see him, the way I imagine him, going to her diary and say, okay, let me read now what you have written. But also someone would feel, if she was sick, someone else in the family would continue. And she did the same also for Shunsui. When he was really sick, that she would continue writing in his stead. It was meant for the family, also to be kept for the next generation, to read and see. It's not didactic, though. Not really. For that, they have other records. I tell you, they have many, many records that would exactly say and tell you what to do.
Well, this record-keeping attitude, this is very similar to the question about what was bought, how much, the lists of things and how much it cost and so on. I also just want to observe that you are so blessed with resources here. There's almost too much, but I'm jealous. I cannot. This is a wonderful gift.
So you're not working in the Edo period?
No, I'm certainly not. And you guys are so lucky.
Well, Edo period. That's it. We got it all.
Us pre-modernists here are all sitting here being really jealous, But for modern historians to have this level of information is not so unusual, right? I assume in diaries and stuff.
For Edo?
No, for the modern historians.
Yeah.
Couple's diary like that?
Yeah, it is rare.
Anyway, so we need to leave the room in about 3 minutes. So if there is any other question, short one, we could handle one, I think. Otherwise, thank you so much
Well,
for
thank you
this.
all.